Hello class. So today we're going to start chapter 15 and it's about monopoly. So we all know about, we have some idea about monopolies, and so it's actually something very common that we see, although the firm structure is not that common, but we hear about it a lot. So we're going to see why do monopolies arise. We're going to see why is marginal revenue less than price for a monopolist, and when we looked at perfect competition, we saw marginal revenue equal to price. We're going to see how do monopolies choose their price and quantity, and finally we're going to see how does monopoly affect society's well-being. And also, finally we are also going to see how do monopolies are controlled or regulated by the government. And finally, we're going to see what is price discrimination, and we're going to look at certain examples. So a monopoly is a firm that is the sole seller of a product without any close substitutes. So basically, monopoly is the only firm in a region or in an industry that produces a product that basically does not have any other substitutes. So we're going to study monopoly and contrast it with perfect competition. So examples of monopoly is like the electric company. Okay, so yeah, technically you could live off grid. You could set up your own solar panels, your own wind farm to get electricity. However, monopoly is something that is actually like you have to get electricity from them. Otherwise, you really don't have any viable substitutes. The water company is something like that. So those things are examples of monopoly. The key difference is between monopoly and perfect competition is that a monopoly firm has something called market power. So since the monopoly is the only firm producing that product, such as the power company, it has the ability to influence the market price. So it can charge the market price to be whatever it wants to, within a certain band, as we will see later. It cannot charge any price, by the way. It cannot charge, like, it can't be like, all right, I'm going to charge $100 per unit of electricity. It can't do that. So, but what it does is that it does have some leverage when it comes to controlling or having some say over the market price. A competitive firm, on the other hand, has no market power. They cannot control the prices. As we saw, they're too small both the buyers and the sellers, to affect the market price. Now, why do monopolies arise? The main reason is barriers to entry. There's some reason, either they are set up by the firm or they're naturally occurring, that does not allow more than one firm to be operating in the market. So there are three sources of barriers to entry. One is a key firm might own a key resource. So one example is De Beers Diamonds owns, or De Beers Diamond Company owns most of the world's diamond mines. So they own that, so they can restrict supply in such a way so that it becomes a valuable resource. And the reason why they can do it is, well, De Beers is a foreign company, so they cannot be really prosecuted here in the US for that. But they basically control the supply of diamonds in the world. And there's actually a really cool article, if you ever want to read it, how De Beers made diamond this very important commodity. Before, in the early 1900s, it wasn't something that people thought was very valuable, but because of proper controlling of resources, De Beers was able to do that. The other kind is the government gives a single firm the exclusive right to produce the product. So one example is like Duke Energy here in North Carolina. Duke Energy has the right to produce electricity in North Carolina. Okay, so the government of North Carolina gave Duke Energy the exclusive right to produce electricity here. Or the water supply. So the municipal government usually has the exclusive right to supply water to the people around that area. The other examples are patent and copyright laws. So if I discover something, I can ask for a patent, and then I have the exclusive right to produce that product for about 15, 20, or 25 years. The third kind is natural monopoly. This is a single firm can produce for the entire market at a lower cost than several firms. And this is because it's better for one firm to have such market power so that they can actually get all the raw materials at a bargain price and then use that to produce output, rather than having 10 or 20 smaller firms to produce the product. So if you look at electricity, electricity firm, you need to have a lot of setup. You need to set up a huge electric generation plant, which uses a lot of fuel to produce electricity. So the more it can supply, the more its average total cost will go down. So it has a huge fixed cost because you need a huge amount of money to set up the plant, but it has a very small marginal cost. The production of one extra unit of electricity is always very small. So what it does is that it keeps on lowering average total cost. So in those cases, it does make sense to have one firm producing electricity for 1,000 homes rather than have 3 or 4 competing firms producing electricity. So, and that's what we just said. So as we can see that here, in a competitive market, the demand curve for any individual firm was horizontal. So this is what as a small single firm, this is what I face. So if I'm a small coffee shop in a city and there's 20 other coffee shops, I can't charge any price. Probably the price I charge has to be very similar or equal to the prices my competitors charge. So for perfect competition, the demand curve for an individual firm is horizontal. The firm can increase quantity without lowering price. So marginal revenue equals price for the competitive firm. And this is what we saw in last chapter. On the other hand, since the monopolist is the only seller, and it is selling to a large market, it does face a demand curve, the market demand curve, to be more exact. So for perfect competition, there is a market demand curve that is downward sloping, and the price and quantity are set by the market demand curve. That price is then used by the perfectly competitive firm to produce how much they want to produce. Since the monopolist is the only firm in the market, so it basically faces the whole market demand curve. Now, if it wants to produce a larger quantity, it has to lower prices. It can't increase price and increase quantity at the same time. If it increases price, it has to lower quantity. If it lowers quantity, it has to increase price. So in this case, the marginal revenue is not equal to price. And we're going to see it here. Let's look at this example. Okay, so supposing Common Grounds is the only seller of cappuccinos in town, and these are the price and quantity of each price and quantity for different levels of output. And so we're going to see what is the relationship between price and average revenue and price and marginal revenue. So if we fill this up, total revenue is of course price times quantity. So when quantity is 3 and price is 3, then total revenue is 3 times 3, which is 9. Okay, so we got our total revenue. Our average revenue is total revenue divided by quantity. So if we do that, of course, average revenue is going to be the price. So in this case, average revenue equals price. Now, what we said marginal revenue is change in quantity over, or change in total revenue over change in quantity. So if we calculate, let's say for this one, if I increase my revenue from 7 to 9, so my change in total revenue is 9 minus 7, which is equal to 2. And my change in quantity is, oh, sorry about that, 3 minus 2, which is equal to 1. So my marginal revenue is change in total revenue divided by change in quantity, which is 2 over 1, which is 2, and that's what I get here. So in this case, as we can see, marginal revenue is not really equal to price. It's actually less than price. So if we draw the graphs now, if that's my demand curve, that's the relationship between price and quantity, that's my marginal revenue curve. So marginal revenue curve is always going to be lower than the demand curve for a monopolist. Okay, and in this case, so how do we maximize profit? Just like a competitive firm, the monopolist maximizes profit by producing at a quantity where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So the point where MR equals MC, that is the profit maximizing point. Okay, so just like that, we have three things. First, we figure out at what point does MR equals MC, and that's the profit maximizing point Q. So once the monopolist maximizes quantity, it then goes up and tries to figure out what is the highest price consumers are willing to pay for that quantity. And it finds the price from the demand curve, and then it charges that price. And then once it charges that price, it then sees how much is the cost to produce that amount, and then basically decides whether it is earning a lot of profit or losses. So let's look at this. At this point, the MR first step is to figure out where does marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and it is this point. So at Q, this is the profit maximizing output. So at this point, profit is maximized. So after the monopolist decides that Q is the point where profit is maximized, it then goes up straight to the demand curve to figure out what price to charge. So it goes up. First it goes down to figure out the quantity, then it goes up to figure out the price. And so once it figures out the price, it charges that price to the consumers and sells quantity Q to the consumers. Now, the difference between the other curve, this curve, and the next one is we added average total cost. Average total cost is used to figure out whether we're earning a profit or a loss. So in this case, to produce quantity Q, average cost is ATC. So just like with the competitive firm, the profit is the profit per unit, which is P minus ATC. So how much profit does the firm get when it sells one extra unit? And the quantity is Q, the total amount that the firm is selling. So the total profit is P minus ATC, each unit times Q, the total unit being sold. So it's the area of the orange rectangle that we see. So the monopolist does not have a supply curve. A competitive firm used to take price as given and used to decide how much to supply or how much to provide to the market. For the monopolist, it's a price maker, not a price taker. It basically decides what price to charge based on the quantity that it is producing. So the quantity does not depend upon price here. They are jointly determined by the marginal revenue, marginal cost, and the demand curve. So in this case, the monopolist really doesn't need a supply curve. It just says, all right, so the market wants Q units, so I'm going to charge P units because the market will be able to pay P as price if I want to sell Q units. If I want to reduce my quantity, I can charge a higher price. If I want to increase my quantity, I can charge a lower price. Therefore, there is no supply curve for the monopolist. Well, let's look at a case study, monopoly versus generic drug. For simplicity, we're just considering marginal cost to be a flat line. So patents on new drugs give a temporary monopoly to the seller. So if a drug company spends years and years to develop a new drug, and once it does, it then applies for a patent, and this gives that drug company a temporary monopoly to produce and sell that drug. So no other company has the right to produce that drug for 15 or 20 years. After that, it becomes a generic drug, and that's when anybody can produce that drug. So when the patent expires, the market becomes competitive and generics appear. So in this case, we have initially, for the monopolist, marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and so the monopoly quantity is QM, and monopoly price is PM. So we see that the monopolist is going to produce at QM units and it's going to charge a price PM, and that is going to maximize its profits. Now, once the patent expires, price equals marginal cost, and that's the one of the qualities of the perfectly competitive firm. So as we can see that, well, not only did price fall from PM to PC, but the quantity that we are selling in the market rose from QM to QC. So there's much more being produced at a much lower price because of competition. So in this case, price equals marginal cost. If you recall, we talked about it last class or in the last chapter, is that in a competitive market equilibrium, price equals marginal cost and the total surplus is maximized. In the monopoly equilibrium, price is greater than marginal cost. And yes, we still have marginal revenue equals marginal cost, but price is greater than marginal revenue and marginal cost. So technically, they could have, if they wanted to, produce more, but that wouldn't have increased profits. That would have actually reduced profits, so they don't want to produce more. So the monopoly quantity, since it's a profit maximizing quantity and it is not producing at the lowest possible cost, or it is not selling it at the lowest possible price, so the quantity is very low that it is producing. So the monopoly then results in something called deadweight loss. This is the extra amount. In a nutshell, what deadweight loss means is that it's the extra amount that the monopolist could have served the market while still earning some profits, but it doesn't because it considers that because it's not profit maximizing. So if it doesn't earn profit, then why should they sell it? So let's say that in this case, the competitive equilibrium is where price equals marginal cost, so it's QC. That means this is the market. If the market were truly competitive, this is the amount that they should have charged. And at this point, the amount that the buyers are getting and the amount that the sellers are providing are requiring to basically produce the product, they are almost equal, and so they're good. And so at that point, the price of the product is basically enough to compensate the production of the good. But in the monopolist equilibrium, the price they are charging is far higher than the cost to produce the last unit. So you are charging a price, P, which is much higher than what it is costing to produce it, which is MC. So you could technically, if the monopolist chose to produce here, let's say, this unit, they could have increased production and it would still cost them much lower to produce it. They could still make profit. However, they don't because for them, they're like, well, at this point, MC is greater than MR, so I'm not going to produce more. I'm only going to produce at a point where MR equals MC, and that's where my profit is maximized. So that's why they actually could have produced this much extra. So they could have produced at QC level, but they don't because for them it is not profit maximizing, and so that triangle, that extra amount that they could have produced, is known as deadweight loss. Now we come to the concept of price discrimination. Discrimination is, in a nutshell, treating people differently based on certain characteristics, like race or gender, giving some people certain advantages because of their race or gender, or giving some people certain disadvantages because of race or gender. Price discrimination is basically selling the same good at different prices to different buyers. So you could have the same product, but to different people you're selling it at different prices. One example is movie tickets. So if you go to the movies and in certain movie theaters, if you show your student ID, you get a discount. That's an example of price discrimination. For example, if you are senior citizen, then if you go to the movies and you show your ID, then you get a discount. And that's an example of price discrimination. And why do they do that? Well, a firm can increase profit by charging a price to buyers who have a higher willingness to pay. So if buyers want to pay more, and if the firm can understand that yes, these buyers are willing to pay more, then they can increase their profits by charging a higher price to those buyers. In the real world, perfect price discrimination is not possible because no firm knows exact buyers' willingness to pay. So supposing I really like rice, okay, that's my favorite thing. Of course, I'm from South Asia. We eat rice almost for every meal. Now, of course, since I am used to eating rice so much, so I'm willing to pay a higher price for rice, and that's called willingness to pay. Now, some other person who grew up eating bread every day, they may not crave rice that much. So for them, their willingness to pay is much lower. Now, if the rice, or if, let's say Harris Teeter charged us the same price, they couldn't make much, they could make profits, but not as much. Now, if they knew that I am willing to pay a higher price for rice and they could charge me a higher price while they could charge a lower price to the other person, then they could technically make more profits. Because the thing is, a lot of times buyers do not reveal it to sellers, and this usually happens when you buy cars. You don't want to reveal too much information about how much you like the car, because then sellers get an idea and then they can start increasing prices. They will be like, oh, this car is great, I don't want to lower the price anymore, if they can figure out that you really like the car. So what firms do is that they divide customers into groups based on some observable characteristics, like age. So for example, when you buy the textbook here, it costs you like a god-awful amount of money, like $350 or something like that. The same textbook, the same author, the same quality. If you buy that same textbooks in a foreign land, let's say in Asia, it would cost you a tenth of the price. So why? Because of price discrimination. There, people have a lower willingness to pay because of lower income. So the same publisher, sells the textbook at a cheaper price abroad than here in the US. So examples of price discrimination: movie tickets. Senior students and people who attend during weekdays, during in the afternoon during weekday, they have lower willingness to pay than people who want to pay full price on a Friday night. Airline prices: if you ever fly anywhere, you will notice that if you wanted to ask, different people pay different price for the same flight. So some people, business travelers, they are not as price sensitive when compared to other leisure travelers. Discount coupon is one. Some people do collect coupons and they use it religiously. Some people don't. They just don't have the energy or effort or time to do that. Need-based financial aid. Not everyone pays the same tuition. If you go around, which is, I probably shouldn't, but different people have different willingness to pay for college. So schools price discriminate by offering need-based aid or different kind of scholarship to low-income families so that they can attend universities. Okay, so that's all we have for monopolists. So hope you have a good rest of the day, and next class we're going to talk about monopolistic competition. Okay.